Hello and buenos dias, amigas! I'm Peter and here I'm telling you stories about the most interesting European cars of the 80s and 90s. Today we are talking about the best-selling Spanish car of the 80s and 90s, the Seat Ibiza. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to never miss a new video. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much! Now let's get back to the car. The Seat Ibiza has been produced from 1984 until this day, in 5 different generations. The first one was produced from 1984 to 1993 and was a huge commercial success for Seat with over 1.3 million cars sold. For comparison, the predecessor of the Ibiza, the Seat Fura, based on the Fiat 127, was made in the quantity of only 85,000 cars during 5 years of its production. In 1999, the first Ibiza received a new life in China, where it was produced until 2008 as the Nanjing Yujin Soyat. Actually, all generations of Ibiza were bestsellers in Spain. The second generation, produced from 1993 to 2002, had a production run of 1.5 million cars. The third generation was produced from 2002 to 2008. The fourth generation from 2008 to 2017. I drove a car of that generation for some time when I lived in Spain in 2014. It was a nice little car. And the current, fifth generation, was launched in 2017, 8 years ago. So we probably can expect a new Ibiza this year, and the first pictures have already been revealed. You can see in some sources that the current generation is number 6, not 5. The confusion comes from the fact that the second facelift of the second generation was called Mark III in the UK, but in other markets it still was Mark II. So for UK drivers there was one additional generation of the Ibiza, and their current generation is number 6. On this channel I speak about cars of the 80s and 90s. So today I'm going to talk about the first 2 generations of the Seat Ibiza. This is the first Seat car on my channel, so let's briefly take a look at the history of Seat brand itself. It is almost unknown in the United States. Seat is the abbreviation for Sociedad Española de Automóviles de Turismo, meaning Spanish passenger car company. The company was created in 1950 as a joint venture between the Spanish government and Italian Fiat, supported by Spanish private banks. For the first 3 decades of its existence, it produced rebadged Fiat cars, with different levels of modification, mostly for the Spanish market. The Seat Ibiza, launched in 1984, was the first Seat car widely sold across Europe, and the first car developed by Seat itself. Well, this is a little stretched, because the car was created with deep involvement of Italian Fiat and Italdesign, and German Karmann and Porsche. But this, anyway, was the first Seat which stepped far beyond the badge engineering concept. In the beginning of the 80s, the relationship between Seat and Fiat went sour over Fiat's rejection to make new investments in the company, and a large and scandalous dispute around the origins of the design of Seat Ronda. So Fiat gradually decreased participation in the Spanish company. Simultaneously, Seat was building relations with a new partner, Volkswagen Group, which became a major shareholder of Seat in 1986 and fully bought out the company in 1990. Volkswagen still owns Seat, and the company feels pretty well on the Spanish market, although the future of the brand is still under question due to Volkswagen's plans to move the Seat's audience to the more premium Cupra brand. In the 80s and 90s, Seat named its cars after Spanish cities and regions. The first was Seat Ronda, named after a beautiful little town in the Andalusian mountains. Then Seat Malaga, after the city in Andalusia, which is very dear to my heart, because I lived for some time nearby. And the next car, the Seat Ibiza, got its name after a very popular Spanish resort island in the Mediterranean Sea, which perfectly reflected the playful, bright and jolly character of this little car. The design of the first generation of the Ibiza was created by famous and glorious Giorgetto Giugiaro of Italdesign Giugiaro, who also created the first Volkswagen Golf, Lancia Delta, DMC DeLorean, Fiat Punto, Lotus Esprit, Saab 9000, and a really huge list of other cars. Initially, Giugiaro created this design for the second generation of Volkswagen Golf. But Volkswagen rejected this design, and Giugiaro decided to reuse it for the Seat Ibiza. So that's how the second Golf could look like. From the technical point of view, the first Ibiza was based on the Seat Ronda, which in turn was built on the platform of Fiat Ritmo, which I already have another video about. The body for the Ibiza was engineered together with German coach builder Karmann, which produced, for example, the Volkswagen Scirocco and convertible versions of the Volkswagen Golf. The engines and transmissions were developed in collaboration with Porsche, and it was proudly highlighted with the insignia System Porsche on the valve cover. So this was the cheapest way to drive a Porsche car in the 80s. Although contrary to some popular beliefs, those engines were never actually made by Porsche. It was just an engineering consultancy project. The Ibiza was produced as a 3-door and 5-door hatchback. In the second generation, the 4-door sedan version of the Ibiza and the 5-door wagon were sold under the name Seat Cordoba, another beautiful Andalusian city with absolutely stunning old town in the center. But for the first generation, there was no direct sedan version. Seat also developed a convertible version, Ibiza Cabrio, for the first generation. It never went into production, but there were several aftermarket convertible conversions available from independent coach builders. The Ibiza had decent aerodynamics, with a drag coefficient of 0.39 for the first generation, and even better 0.32 to 0.35 for the second generation cars. The first Ibiza was a rather quirky car for its time, with several unusual features. The spare wheel was located under the hood in the engine compartment. It wasn't unique. The Fiat Ritmo and the Lada Niva also had spare wheels placed the same way, but it still was very unusual. What was unique for the Ibiza? The location of many buttons on the dashboard, controlling lights, wipers and other functions. For the first years, they were located behind the steering wheel, on the steering column. I have an ambivalent opinion about that. On the one hand, the driver had all buttons very close and didn't need to stretch hands to find and push them. But at the same time, pressing buttons behind the steering wheel, or even through the steering wheel, doesn't seem like a safe activity. If you drove the first gen Ibiza, please tell me in the comments, was it convenient or not? The first generation had two facelifts, in 1989 and 1991, and at the first update the dashboard was replaced and the buttons were moved to more common and familiar places. The turn signals in the first Ibizas before the facelift operated with a rocking button and not a stick switch like in virtually all other cars. The windshield wiper modes were selected by a sliding flag behind the steering wheel. And by the way, there was only one wiper on the windshield, like in the Mercedes-Benz 190. But in the Ibiza it wasn't so sophisticated, and it didn't clean enough surface area, so it was replaced with a traditional two wipers arrangement in the second generation. Despite its small size, with a length of 368 cm or 145 inches and the width of 161 cm or 63 inches, the Ibiza was rather spacious inside. Of course, it still was a super mini, but it was roomy and relatively comfortable due to a long wheelbase aimed at providing larger interior space. The driver's position was convenient, and both front seats had enough legroom. Sitting on the rear seats was obviously not so spacious, but absolutely doable for two adults for short city trips. The legroom there was tight, but not terrible, and the headroom was more than enough. The trunk wasn't particularly spacious, but with folded rear seats you could put a lot of luggage there. In 1986, Seat was acquired by Volkswagen. The new owner didn't rush to make changes in well-selling Ibiza, but as I said, there were two updates in 1989 and 1991, which rather significantly changed the interior and exterior look of the car. Volkswagen wanted to sell more Seat cars in other countries of Europe, and found a good position for the Ibiza in its product line. The Ibiza was marketed with an active, young, and most importantly, affordable image targeted at the young audience and at those who were looking for a great value for money ratio. Volkswagen placed the Ibiza as a competitor to Renault Clio and Citroën Saxo. and a little lower than its own, a little more conservative Volkswagen Polo. In 1993, Seat launched the second generation of the Ibiza, also designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro. It was based on the seriously modified A03 platform of the third generation of Volkswagen Polo. But for the Ibiza, it was married with many elements of the A3 platform of the third generation of Volkswagen Golf. So, despite differences between those two platforms, the Ibiza was an offspring of both of them. The second generation had fewer quirks than the Mark I, and the spare wheel could be found in its regular place under the floor of the trunk. The interior from the start was borrowed from the Polo, but was changed later to a more distinct one at the facelifts. But there were some interesting features anyway. For example, the second glove box under the steering column, or an optional cassette holder built in the center console. And the car still had enough internal space and even bigger trunk than the first generation. The second generation had two facelifts, in 1996 and 1999. The last one changed the appearance of the car, both inside and outside, rather significantly. In the UK, the facelifted cars were even marketed as a new third generation. The most distinctive features were new look of the front part, with different headlights and front grille separated in three parts, the new taillights and overall appearance of the trunk lid, and the new dashboard with a large LCD screen in the middle of the center console. This was a rather advanced feature for the 1999. The range of engines, both for the first and the second generation of the Ibiza, was wide and interesting. All of them were inline four-cylinder engines. The information on technical specs is slightly different in different sources, so the numbers I'm going to say are a kind of average approximation. The weakest engine from the launch of the first generation was a small carbureted Fiat engine with just 900 cc, 44 horsepower, a top speed of 130 km or 81 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 17 seconds. This car was weak and slow even for the 80s, but it had the fuel efficiency of over 50 miles per gallon, so it probably was better for the environment than many modern electric cars. If people really cared about global warming, they should have driven something like that, and not heavy expensive electric toys, and I'm not kidding here. The next one was a 1.2-liter engine developed together with Porsche. At first it was carbureted with 60 horsepower, but the fuel-injected version with 71 horses was available starting from 1989. The most powerful engine from the start of sales had a 1.5-liter displacement and also had the system Porsche insignia. With the carburetor, it produced 85 horsepower, with a top speed of 175 km or 108 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 12 seconds. With fuel injection from 1988, it produced 99 horses, with a top speed of 184 km or 114 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds. There was also a turbo version of this engine available for Switzerland only for some reason in 1985 and 1986. It produced 109 horsepower, a top speed of 190 km or 118 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds. This was the fastest Ibiza of the first generation. And there was one more Seat Porsche engine available in 1999-1993 with a 1.7-liter displacement from 97 to 107 horses for different markets, a top speed of 185 km or 115 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds. There were also a naturally aspirated 1.7-liter diesel engine from Fiat with 55 horsepower, a top speed of 150 km or 93 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 16.5 seconds. Like the small gasoline engine, it had great fuel efficiency, and diesel was cheaper than gasoline in Europe at that time, so this version was rather popular. The second generation had an even larger selection of gasoline engines, with a displacement from 1 liter to 2 liters, and different variations of 1.9-liter diesel, naturally aspirated or turbocharged. I'm not going to list all 34 available options, let's just mention the weakest and more powerful ones. On the small side, there was a 1-liter fuel-injected engine with 44 slow horses, a top speed of 140 km or 87 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 17 seconds. The most powerful non-GTI engine was a 1.6-liter one, producing from 75 to 101 horsepower in different years, with a top speed from 170 to 195 kilometers or 106 to 121 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 from 13 to 10.5 seconds. But this generation of the Ibiza got also several performance versions. The first one was the Ibiza GTI with a 2-liter engine, 113 horses, a top speed of 195 km or 121 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. From 1994 to 1996, some markets also had GTI versions with a 1.8-liter engine, 127 horses, a top speed of 210 km or 130 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 8 seconds, which was already rather fast. But the most interesting version of the second Ibiza was the Seat Ibiza Cupra. Cupra is actually an acronym for Cup Racing. It was prepared by the rally division of Seat to celebrate the success of the Ibiza in rally racing. Seat tried to use Ibiza in motorsport since the first generation in 1985. In 1986, they built a very interesting Ibiza bimotor rally car with 2 engines, but it wasn't successful on a track. In 1995, they returned and won several rally races in the two-wheel drive category with a 1.8-liter Ibiza. The next year, 1996, they entered the World Rally Championship and won it in the 2-liter engine category with a car called Seat Ibiza Seat Ibiza Kit Car that made them the first brand who ever won the world title in its first year of participation. To celebrate this, Seat started production of the super performance version of the Ibiza based on the rally car under the name Seat Ibiza Cupra, which was the most powerful car in the line. The first Cupra, introduced in 1996, had a 2-liter 16-valve naturally aspirated engine, producing 148 horsepower with a top speed of 216 km or 134 miles per hour, with 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.9 seconds. In 1999, together with the restyling, the Cupra engine was replaced by a 1.8-liter 20-valve turbo engine with 156 horses, a top speed of 218 km or 135 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds. And in 2002, the last year of the second generation, this engine was upgraded, and now it had 178 horny ponies, a top speed of 225 km or 140 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 6.9 seconds. Very good for a car of this class. Volkswagen continued using the name Cupra in the next generation of Ibiza, and recently made a separate brand out of it. In fact, they are going to fully replace the Seat brand for Cupra by 2030, but we'll see how it will play. The first generation cars could have either a 4-speed manual transmission for small 0.9 and 1.2-liter engines, or a 5-speed manual gearbox for larger engines. A 3-speed automatic transmission was available for 1.2 and 1.5-liter engines, but it was very rare. For the second generation, a 5-speed manual gearbox was standard for all regular cars. The Cupra and allegedly some GTIs could have a 6-speed manual transmission. A 4-speed automatic transmission was optional for 1.4 and 1.6-liter gasoline engines, but also not so many drivers in Europe chose this option. But what about driving experience? Well, you couldn't expect much from a small and cheap entry-level family car. But actually, both two first generations were better than you could expect. They both were fun to drive, solidly built and reliable enough, and larger engines provided you with good performance. They were very predictable in driving, with slight, easily controlled understeering in fast corners, and not intimidating at all. With a relatively long wheelbase compared to the overall length of the car and low center of mass, they gave an active driver good maneuverability and stability. The first generation was of course a little slow and not so dynamic like GTI and Cupra versions of the Mark II, but they were well built and pleasant to drive with large engines, and very fuel efficient with small ones. Buyers had a lot of options to choose from, depending on personal needs and preferences. In the second generation, the Cupra version was a very interestingly handling car, which some car journalists called one of the best handling performance small hatchbacks of its time. Man & Motors called the Ibiza Cupra a cross between a rally car and a go-kart, and produced a very positive review of it. The Cupra chassis was more raw and brutal in comparison to French competitors, the Citroën Saxo, Renault Clio or Peugeot 106. But it was beneficial for many drivers who liked the pure driving feeling. And all versions of the Ibiza, even regular, not the performance ones, from behind the steering wheel felt faster than they actually were. And if you add good production quality, especially for the second generation cars, and great value for money, you can easily understand why those cars were so popular not only in Spain, but around the whole of Europe. The Seat Ibiza was never sold in the United States, none of its generations. But all cars of the first generation and many cars of the second generation are older than 25 years now, so you can import one from Europe or Mexico, if you have such desire. I'm not sure about regular cars, but the Cupra and maybe GTI could be very interesting and unique cars to own and drive in the US. In Europe, the first generation Ibiza may cost from 300 to 4000 euros now. The second generation cars are from just 500 to 4500 euros for regular cars, with Cupras up to 10 or even 18,000 euros depending on the mileage, condition and modifications. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you owned or drove a Seat Ibiza of the first or second generation, please tell me about your experience and your opinion on this car in the comments below. Thank you so much for your stories. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. New interesting stories are coming soon. And if you want to support this channel even more and help me make new videos, you can buy me a coffee by the link in the description below, or simply don't skip YouTube commercials on my videos. Muchas gracias, amigos, and see you next time.